There was a small town resting between rolling hills and whispering fields, a town so still you could hear the church bell echo across the valley long after it stopped ringing. Morning light crept through cottonwood trees, and evenings glowed with the scent of wood smoke and bread cooling on windowsill. It was the kind of place where everyone knew who baked the best pie, whose cow had wandered off again, and who still left a candle burning in the window at night. The roads were narrow and unhurried. Dirt paths worn smooth by years of footsteps, by stories that began and ended right there on those same streets. Children played barefoot near the creek. Old men played checkers outside the general store. And time itself, seemed to move at the pace of the wind. In that quiet town lived two sisters, Clara and June. Clara, the elder, was known for her beauty. Hair the color of ripe wheat, eyes like morning sky, clear and sure. When she entered a room, heads turned as if light itself had shifted to follow her. People said she was born lucky, born to be admired, born to have the world fall at her feet. June, by contrast, moved through life quietly. Her beauty wasn't the kind you'd notice at first glance. It was softer, the kind that revealed itself slowly, like sunlight finding its way through morning fog. She spoke gently, but when she did, people listened. She had a way of seeing good where others saw nothing at all, a way of making even silence feel safe. Their father owned a small farm at the edge of town, white fence, red barn, and a dog that barked at everything but meant no harm. Life there was simple. Hard, sometimes, but simple. The days began with the rooster's cry and ended with the hum of crickets and the sigh of wind through the cornfields. Neighbors often stopped by, sometimes with fresh milk, sometimes just for a story before supper. It was in that same small town, on a sun-warmed afternoon, that Ethan first arrived. He came from the next county over, a man with weathered hands and eyes that spoke more than his mouth ever did. He carried the quiet of the land with him, the kind of quiet that wasn't emptiness, but peace. Their father had hired him to help repair the barn roof before winter, and from the moment he stepped onto their land, it seemed something in the air shifted, just slightly, but enough for June to feel it. Ethan wasn't like the men the sisters knew. He didn't boast, didn't stare too long, didn't rush to impress. He moved with purpose. He worked with focus. And when he smiled, which wasn't often, it carried warmth that stayed long after a day turned Hawaii. Everyone expected him to fall for Clara, because everyone always did. She was used to admiration, used to being the center of every conversation, used to having people orbit around her beauty like moths drawn to a lamp. At first, she didn't even notice Ethan, and when she did, she thought of him as another admirer waiting to happen. But he didn't follow the script. He didn't linger on her. His eyes, though kind, never searched for her approval. Instead, they often drifted, almost unknowingly, toward June. At the well, he'd offer to carry the water bucket. At supper, he'd listen when June spoke, not politely, but intently, as if her words had weight. And for reasons she couldn't name, June found herself waiting for those small moments. The quiet ones, the ones that felt like secrets shared only between them and the wind. The town began to notice. Because small towns always do, a glance there, a smile there. Nothing more. But it was enough to start a whisper. They're close, aren't they? He spends more time talking to June than working on that barn. The gossip rippled through porches and pews, through Sunday dinners and market stalls. Everyone had something to say, but June didn't. She said nothing, because she wasn't sure what it was. She was feeling only that it was real. Clara brushed it off with laughter. "He's just shy," she'd say. "He'll come around." But beneath the laughter, there was something new, something uneasy, a flicker of jealousy she'd never felt before. For the first time, she wasn't the center. For the first time, someone had looked past her light and seen another's. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan kept coming back. Even after the roof was mended, he'd bring small things, a jar of honey, a bag of apples, sometimes a single flower plucked from the roadside. Each time, he had some small reason, an excuse, thin as paper. But no one was fooled, especially not June. When he smiled at her, the world seemed to quiet itself, as if even the wind wanted to listen. Clara noticed, and though she laughed and teased, there was a sharpness behind her eyes. She began to watch them, not with curiosity, but with fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize someone else has what you always believed would be yours. Ethan's visits grew longer. He'd linger by the fence after sunset. June would bring him lemonade, and they'd talk about small things, about nothing at all. But their words carried something deeper, something unspoken. He'd tell her about his mother, about working the land since he was a boy, about how quiet can be both a comfort and a curse. June would listen, and sometimes she'd simply smile, because she understood without needing to say so. There were moments when their hands brushed accidentally, perhaps, but those small touches lingered longer than either of them admitted. And as summer began to wane, the world around them changed. The fields turned golden. The air grew heavy with the scent of ripening corn, and in that light, warm, fleeting, like a memory still being written, love quietly began to take shape. June didn't name it. Neither did Ethan. But the town saw, and the town spoke. What could he possibly see in her? She's plain, too quiet. Maybe he feels sorry for her. The whispers grew louder. They filled the air like a hum you couldn't escape. And soon, even Clara began to believe them. He'll come around, she'd tell herself in the mirror. Men always do, but deep down, she knew this time was different. Because Ethan wasn't chasing beauty. He was chasing peace, and peace had found him in June. The days stretched longer. The sky dimmed earlier, and with each passing sunset, the space between what the world expected and what love desired grew wider. It was only a matter of time before everything would change. And on one amber evening, when the fields shimmered like fire under the setting sun, Ethan walked up that long dirt road toward the sisters' home, carrying not just a question, but a choice that would echo through every corner of that small town forever. That evening began like any other. The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in strokes of gold and rose. Cicadas sang their usual song, and the scent of rain lingered somewhere far away, like a promise not yet kept. Inside the farmhouse, supper was nearly ready. Clara arranged the plates with practiced grace. June stirred the pot of stew, quiet but content. Their father sat by the window, smoking his pipe, watching the horizon fade. Everything was ordinary. Everything was safe, until the sound of footsteps echoed on the porch. Ethan stood at the doorway, hat in hand, eyes calm but uncertain. The world seemed to still for a moment. Even the crickets hushed, as if the evening itself knew something was about to change. "Evening," he said softly. June turned, her hand frozen mid-stir. Clara smiled first, that bright, confident smile she always wore like armor. "Evening," she echoed. "Come in, you're just in time for supper." He nodded politely, but his eyes didn't linger on her. They found June, and stayed there. The smallest look, but it carried the weight of everything unsaid. He joined them at the table, laughed or tried to fill the air, but it faltered, fragile, like glass, about to crack. Clara asked him about the harvest, about his work, about the weather. Anything to make the silence go away. He answered kindly, but always, his gaze drifted back to June. June tried to look away, but her heart betrayed her. She could feel his presence, the stillness he carried, the steadiness she'd come to crave. Their father didn't notice, or perhaps he chose not to. He was a man who believed in letting things find their own way. When supper ended, Clara cleared the table with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ethan offered to help, but she refused. June began washing dishes quietly, her hands trembling just enough for the water to ripple in the basin. Ethan lingered by the doorway. He said he had something to say. Before he left, something important. Clara turned toward him first. "Yes?" she asked. Voice light, careful. But he didn't look at her. He looked at June. The silence that followed was heavy, unforgiving. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. "June," he said finally. Her name alone sounded like a confession. "There's something I need to tell you." Clara's hands froze mid-motion. Her breath caught a quiet gasp, so faint it barely existed. June's eyes lifted, hesitant. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan took a slow step forward, hat still in hand, as though crossing that small kitchen floor meant crossing everything he'd ever feared. "I came here to fix a roof," he said, "but I found something I didn't expect." His voice trembled slightly. "I found peace. And I found you." June's heart pounded. The room blurred around her. Her hands clutched the edge of the counter as if the world might slip away beneath her feet. Clara turned sharply, her voice tight. "What are you saying?" Ethan turned toward her gently, the way you'd turn toward someone you didn't want to hurt but knew you would. "I'm saying," he breathed, "I've come to care for your sister." The words fell heavy into the silence, like stones sinking deep into water. Clara's smile vanished. Her jaw tightened. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say. Her beauty, her charm, none of it could protect her from the truth standing in front of her now. June whispered, "Ethia," but her voice broke before she could say more. He took another step closer, not touching her, just standing near enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. "I don't expect anything," he said softly. "I just needed to be honest." Then he nodded once, as if sealing something sacred, and stepped out into the night. The door closed behind him, and the sound echoed through the house like thunder. No one spoke for a long time. Only the ticking clock dared to move. Finally, Clara turned, her voice low and trembling. "Is that true?" June couldn't answer. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced them down. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "I never wanted. You never wanted." Clara interrupted, her tone sharp, bitter, a sound June had never heard from her before. "You never wanted the one thing I've always had." June stepped forward, shaking her head. "Clara, please." But Clara's eyes glistened with anger and something else. Pain. Deep and new. "For once," Clara said, "someone looked past me. And you let him." June froze. Her heart broke in quiet places words could never reach. That night, Clara didn't come to supper again. She stayed in her room, a single candle burning late into the dark. June sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the fields. And for the first time, peace felt like something dangerous, because in loving quietly, she had broken something sacred, not out of malice, but out of truth. Days passed. The air grew colder. Leaves began to turn and fall like whispered confessions from the trees. The town noticed Clara's silence first. No laughter at the market, no chatter at Sunday gatherings, only a pale smile and eyes that never quite met anyone else's. June tried to speak to her, but Clara avoided her gently, gracefully, as if pretending everything was fine could make it so. And Ethan. Ethan didn't come by again. Not for weeks. Not until the season began to shift toward harvest. When he finally appeared, he looked different. Tired, thoughtful, and a little older somehow. He greeted their father, asked after the farm, and then turned to June. "We need to talk," he said. They walked to the edge of the field, where the corn swayed golden in the wind. The air smelled of earth and smoke and endings. "I shouldn't have said what I did," he began. "Not that it wasn't true, but I see now it's hurt people I never meant to hurt." June's throat tightened. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said quietly. "It's just complicated." He nodded. Maybe some things are meant to stay unspoken. But even as he said it, they both knew silence could never undo what had already begun. Behind them, the farmhouse stood quiet against the dying light. Two sisters under one roof. Their hearts forever, divided by a single moment of truth. Flat evening, as the last light faded and the crickets began, their song again, the quiet, that once felt peaceful, now carried a weight neither of them could escape. And somewhere deep in the stillness, the town, their world, began to change. Not loudly, not suddenly, but but slowly, like the way autumn turns toward winter, soft and inevitable. Because some storms don't come with thunder, they come with silence. And this silence had only just begun. Autumn came quietly. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and fading leaves. The fields turned to gold, then brown, then bare. The town slowed with the season, but inside the Miller house, the stillness was heavy, not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against the walls, that made every sound feel too loud, too alive. Clara still moved with grace, still smiled when spoken to, still braided her hair each morning. But her laughter, that bright, familiar melody, was gone. June noticed it most in the evenings, when she'd light the lamp and find the chair across from her empty, when she'd glance toward Clara's door and see only shadows, when she'd speak softly and hear no answer. Their father sensed it too. He sighed little, but the lines around his eyes deepened. He watched his daughters like a man trying to understand a storm he couldn't stop. Weeks drifted into one another, days of chores and quiet meals, until one morning a letter arrived. The envelope was sealed with a neat curl of ink. It was addressed to June. Clara handed it to her without a word. Her fingers brushed June's, cool as riverstone. June hesitated, opened it, slowly. Inside, Ethan's handwriting. Careful, firm, deliberate. He wrote of harvest work in the next county, of long days and colder nights, and at the bottom, one final line. When the frost comes, I'll return, if you'll have me. June's breath caught. Her heart fluttered like a bird, too long caged. But when she looked up, Clara was already walking away. That night, rain began to fall, slow, at first, then steady, a whisper that grew into a roar. The house creaked under the weight of wind. Thunder rolled through the hills. June lay awake, listening to the storm and the sound of her own thoughts. She thought of Ethan, out there somewhere, maybe cold, maybe thinking of her. And she thought of Clara, so close, yet slipping further away with each breath. The storm outside became the storm within. By morning, the fields were soaked. The creek overflowed its banks. Branches littered the ground like the remnants of something once whole, and in the pale gray light, Clara was gone. June found her note on the kitchen table. Just a few words. Don't come after me. I need to be somewhere I can forget. June stood there, the paper trembling in her hand. Her father read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. She'll be back, he said quietly. But even he didn't sound certain. The days that followed were heavy with waiting. Waiting for a knock. Waiting for a sign. Waiting for forgiveness, but non ekame. Winter swept across the valley. Snow dusted the fences, covered the barn roofs, softened the world into silence. Ethan returned just before Christmas. His coat was worn, his hands roughened by frost and labor. But his eyes, they carried the same gentle warmth. June met him at the gate. Neither spoke at first. They simply stood there, two souls that had been through the same long storm. I wasn't sure I should come back, he said finally. I didn't know if it was right anymore. June's breath fogged in the cold. Her voice barely rose above the wind. It's never been easy to know what's right, she said. Only what feels true. He nodded slowly. Then, with quiet courage, he reached into his coat pocket. A small box, plain, wooden, worn, smooth by time. He opened it. Inside, a simple ring. No jewels, just silver, dull from use, like something meant to last. I don't have much to give, he said, but I know what my heart wants. June's eyes filled with tears. The world blurred into white and gray and wonder, and for a moment, she forgot the ache of what had been lost. Yes, she whispered. The word came out like a prayer. Jis. He smiled, relieved, and drew her close. The warmth between them felt like spring trying to bloom beneath the snow. But happiness, even honest happiness, can leave a shadow behind, and theirs was named Clara. When the news spread, the town stirred again. Some were happy for June. Others whispered, as towns often do. She took a sister's chance. She waited for him to come back. She shouldn't be proud. June heard it all. She tried not to care, but every word carried the faint scent of truth or guilt. The wedding was small. Snowflakes drifted like blessings from the sky. The church candles flickered, casting gold light on rough wooden walls. Ethan and June stood hand in hand. Her father gave her away quietly, his eyes glistening, proud, sad, grateful. When they spoke their vows, the air itself seemed to pause. Even the cold wind softened. Their love wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind that endures in silence, that grows deeper when words fall short. Afterward, the two walked home beneath the silver moon. Their boots left prints in the fresh snow, 2 lines side by side, never parting. The house felt different that night. Alive again, warm again, as if it had been waiting all along for this peace to return. But peace is fragile, and somewhere beyond the hills, where the city lights begin and the dirt roads end, a woman stood in the rain, staring at her reflection in a darkened window. Clara, her coat was thin. Her hands trembled. Her eyes, once bright with confidence, now dimmed with the ache of memory. She whispered to her reflection, "He chose her." And though no one heard, the words lingered in the cold like a curse. She had left to forget, but forgetting was harder than she'd imagined. Every sunset reminded her of home. Every song on the radio carried the echo of his voice. Every mirror held June's face in place of her own. Clara had won many things in her life: admiration, attention, affection, but never peace. And now, far from home, she began to wonder if peace had always been the one thing she truly wanted. Years passed. The seasons rolled over the valley like turning pages. Winter melted into spring, and the fields bloomed once more with the soft green of forgiveness. June and Ethan's home stood at the edge of town, a small white house wrapped in ivy and laughter. Its windows always glowed at dusk. Its porch always smelled of baked bread and lilac. They built a life, not of grand things, but of quiet miracles. A garden that never stopped growing. Children who ran barefoot through the grass, their laughter echoing into the hills. Ethan worked the land with hands that knew both labor and love. June kept the heart of the house steady. Each meal, each word, each moment filled with tenderness too simple to name. The townsfolk came to respect them. Even those who had once whispered learned to soften, because time has a way of revealing truth and humbling judgment. But somewhere beyond those hills, in the restless sprawl of the city, Clara's story took a different path. She drifted between bright lights and empty rooms. She was adored in photographs, admired at parties, and utterly alone when the music stopped. Her laughter became performance. Her beauty, a mask she could no longer remove. Men came and went, each one drawn to the sparkle, none staying for the silence beneath it. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, she would close her eyes and hear the sound of rain on the old farmhouse roof. She would remember June's soft voice, Ethan's steady kindness, and the way home had smelled of earth and safety. And she would weep not from jealousy, but from the ache of knowing what she had traded away. Years blurred. The city changed faces. So did she. Until one morning, as she gazed into the mirror, she saw not the beauty that once defined her, but the exhaustion of a life spent chasing what never stayed. That was the day she packed her things. A single suitcase, a worn coat, and a heart ready to go home. The train carried her across miles of memory, past rivers that shimmered like old secrets, past fields that whispered of beginnings she could never undo. When the conductor called her stop, the town looked smaller than she remembered, quieter, older, softer. She stepped off the platform into the same wind that had once tangled her hair in youth, the same wind that carried her name through gossip and regret. But now, it felt forgiving. It felt like grace. Clara walked the dirt road slowly. Every fence post, every tree, every creak of the barn spoke of a time long gone. When she reached the Miller house, she stopped. The ivy climbed higher now. Children's laughter floated from the back garden, and there, on the porch, sat June, silver-haired, gentle, shelling peas beneath the fading sun. For a long moment, Clara couldn't move. Her throat tightened with years of silence. Her hands trembled around the handle of her suitcase. Junelle looked up, her eyes, the same calm blue, found Clara instantly. No shock, no anger, just recognition, and something deeper. Love, quiet and enduring. "Clara," she said softly, as if saying the name of a prayer she'd never stopped repeating. Clara's lips parted, but words failed her. Tears slipped down before speech could find its way. She set her suitcase down, crossed the porch, and knelt beside her sister. "I should have come sooner," she whispered. "I should have known better." June's smile was small, but it reached her eyes. "You came when you were ready." Clara shook her head, her voice cracked. "I spent half my life trying to prove I was the one worth choosing. And they say no. He did choose. Right, he chose what I never understood." June reached out, took her sister's hand, and held it with the same gentleness she'd always carried. "Love," she said, "was never about being chosen first. It's about being seen truly." The silence that followed was heavy, not with pain, but with peace. From the garden came the sound of a child's laughter. A boy ran past the porch, chasing fireflies, his small lantern flickering like a heart refusing to dim. June smiled, watching him. "He looks like Ethan," Clara murmured. "He acts like him too," June replied softly. "Steady, kind, always looking for light." They sat together until the sky turned violet, until the crickets began their song, until the years between them melted away like mist. When the first star appeared, Clara leaned her head against June's shoulder. Her voice was a whisper. "Do you ever miss him?" June's eyes glistened in the twilight. "Every day," she said, "but missing him reminds me he was real." The two sisters watched the stars rise over the quiet town. The same sky that had once witnessed their youth now watched over their forgiveness. Word spread quickly, as it always does in small towns. The Miller sisters are together again. Some smiled when they heard it. Some simply nodded. Because deep down, everyone knew this was how it was always meant to end. Days turned into weeks. Clara stayed. She helped in the garden, told stories to the grandchildren, sang softly while June cooked. She began to laugh again, not the bright, performative laugh of the city, but the kind that comes from real joy, from roots refound. At night, she would sit on the porch, watching the fields sway under the moonlight, and she would whisper into the wind, "Thank you for waiting." Years later, when June passed away peacefully in her sleep, Clara stayed in that house. She kept the porch light burning every night, just as June had, and when townsfolk came by, they'd find her sitting there older, softer, but with the same calm in her eyes that June once carried. Sometimes, children would ask her, "Miss Clara, why do you keep that old light burning?" She'd smile faintly and say, "So love never loses its way home." And when she finally joined him, Ethan, June, and all the gentle ghosts of memory, the house didn't fall silent. It shunk. The wind moved through the fields, whispering their story again and again. People passing by could swear they heard voices, soft, steady, woven with laughter and grace. He rejected the beautiful sister. The old folks would tell their grandchildren, not because she wasn't lovely, but because love sees what eyes cannot. And so, in that little town, where stories grow roots deeper than oak, the tale of Ethan, June, and Clara became legend, a lesson whispered by generations, that beauty fades, but kindness endures, that time can heal what pride once shattered, that even the most overlooked soul can hold the brightest light. On quiet nights, if you stand by the Miller porch and listen closely, you might still hear them voices mingling with the breeze, Ethan's low and steady, June's soft and sure. Clara's finally at peace. Beauty fades, he says. Kindness doesn't. And somewhere, deep in that eternal whisper, love lives on unchosen by eyes, but chosen by the heart.